Hello, dear students, how are you? Hope you are fine. Today, let us talk about an important concept in microeconomics, that is elasticity of demand. Synonymously, we call it price elasticity of demand, or elasticity of demand in economics is understood as elasticity of demand. So we can write that uh, price elasticity okay of demand. Now, uh, the question arises, what does elasticity literally mean? Elasticity word, elasticity, it means responsiveness, or we can say sensitivity, isn't it? Sensitivity. So in what context is the literal meaning of elasticity? In what context elasticity is used, and what does it imply? How this concept helps us frame different types of policies in economics, in public finance, and especially and in other branches of economics as well. Now, the nature of the concept is solely and wholly microeconomic. It's a concept in microeconomics, and it has various applications in economics. Now, before going ahead, we need to this is the literal meaning of elasticity. First of all, just we need to remind I need to remind you of law of demand. Law of demand suggests an inverse relationship between quantity demanded and price of a commodity. Quantity demanded, isn't it? So law of demand states an inverse sorry inverse relationship relationship between price and quantity demanded, isn't it? Quantity demanded, ceteris paribus, other things remaining constant. Now, besides this, law of demand does not say anything. I mean to say the degree of responsiveness. If, for example, price increases by 5%, what will be the change in quantity demanded? Law of demand says that if you are going to increase the price, quantity demand will decrease. But how much? This how much? This how much? The extent, the responsiveness. How much? How much? This how much is what law of demand is unable to describe. Law of demand can't explain how much the quantity demand will fall or the quantity demanded will increase to the given change in price. This is where we are caught in, and this concept was introduced in economics in order to know the extent of quantity, in order to know the extent to which the quantity demanded will respond given the change in prices. Now, we need to we need to introduce here another concept in order to understand this how much. So we can say that law of demand is simply what? Law of demand is simply a you know qualitative statement, isn't it? Qualitative statement. It's just a qualitative statement. It just states that there is an inverse relationship. There is an inverse relationship, nothing else. This is an inverse relationship between the two variables concerned. Other than this, law of demand fails to tell anything. But how much quantity demanded will increase or decrease to the given change in prices, law of demand is unable to, law of demand fails to explain this. So we need to know, for example, if I am a supplier, I increase the price by 5%, what will be the change on the quantity demanded? I know that if I increase price by 5%, quantity demand will fall. This is understood, but I need to know how much, what percentage, by how much percentage quantity demanded will fall. you know if I increase price by 5%, by how much percentage quantity demanded will fall? Will it remain same? Definitely it should fall, because law of demand states that there is an inverse relationship. Similarly, if I decrease price by 5%, what will be the impact of on quantity demanded? Law of demand can't say this, and this we have to understand in the concept, under concept, that price elasticity of demand, elasticity of demand. Now let I hope that you have understood these points till up to this. Now let us move ahead. See, Alfred Marshall, this point should be noted. Alfred Marshall introduced, isn't it, for the first time introduced the concept of elasticity of demand. Price elasticity of demand or elasticity of demand, this is synonymously used in economics. In economics, isn't it? He introduced, but uh, so he was the first, who, Alfred Marshall, he introduced the concept of, you know elasticity in economics. Let us see his words, what are his words regarding elasticity of demand. Now he said, I'll use inverted commas here because this is the reported speech. The elasticity of demand in a market, he said, the elasticity of demand in a market in a market is great or small, great or small, isn't it, according as the amount demanded, according as the amount demanded, isn't it, increases much or little. See, increases much or little for a given fall in price, for a given fall in price, okay, or and diminishes much or little, and diminishes much or little for a given rise in price, for a given rise in price, inverted commas close. Now here we need to, in this definition that Marshall has put forth, there are two keywords that are core to the concept of elasticity. Core to the concept of elasticity: much or little. I used a different color in order to highlight these 2 points, isn't it? In order to highlight these 2 points. So I have not yet explained what the concept is. I am just creating a prelude. I am just creating a preface, you know so as to make you understand the concept quite clearly. You should not switch to another video. The demand for this video should be perfectly inelastic. So the demand for watching this video, I mean to say, should be perfectly inelastic, given the way I am explaining things. So Alfred Marshall was the first who introduced this concept in economics. Let me fasten myself. The elasticity of demand in a market is great or small according as the amount demanded increases much or little for a given fall in price and diminishes much or little for a given rise in price. Now, one thing is visible, that law of demand is evident in this definition of law of demand, is again reflected in this definition of elasticity as put forth by Marshall. How? He says that according as the amount demanded increases, isn't it, increases for a given fall in price. So when price falls, quantity demand increases, isn't it? It's law of demand evident in this definition. Similarly, he says diminishes much or little for a given rise in price. So when the price is increased, quantity demanded diminishes or decreases. So one thing is evident, that in this definition, this law of demand is evident. Law of demand gets reflected in this definition, what Arthur Marshall has put forth. Now let us understand the two important keywords which are quite important to conceptualize this concept of this elasticity. He said much or little, isn't it? Much demand, as the amount demanded increases much or little, much or little. Now this is the extent that I was trying to make you understand, that this is the little, this is much or little, and much or little, this defines the extent, much or little. And this much or little you need to keep in mind, isn't it? I revert to it after some time, this much or little, when I'll put forth a few examples, that much or little defines the elasticity. Now here Marshall says that the elasticity of demand in the market is great or small. When elasticity is great, it means it's elastic. When elasticity is great, it's respectively is great, it is elastic. It means if for a given fall in price, quantity demand increases much, for a fall in price quantity demand increases much, then elasticity is great. It means that the demand is elastic, it's highly elastic. If for a given fall in price, quantity demanded increases little, increases but yeah, little, so in this case we say it is small, it is small. This is great or small, this is much or little. This is great or small here in this case, this is much or little. So this is evident, I don't need to explain much more. So elasticity is great, it means it's elastic, demand is elastic. Elasticity is small, it means demand is inelastic. So if for a fall, a given fall in price, quantity demanded increases much, so it means that the demand is elastic. If for a given fall in price, quantity demanded increases little, it means it does not respond I can't say at all, that are the extremes that I'm going to discuss. If it increases little for a given rise in price, it will mean that that demand is inelastic. Similarly, for a given fall in price, if quantity decreases much for a given fall and rise in price, quantity decreases much for a given rise in price, it means that the demand is elastic. If quantity diminishes or quantity decreases little, isn't it, for a given rise in price, so there will be rise, but the quantity demand won't respond to such an extent, it will decrease by little amount. So in such case we will say that the demand is inelastic. Now these are the two ways that Marshall put forth, that this much or little, uh, they are defining the extent that I mentioned, that the extent to which the quantity demanded responds to the changes in prices. This is quite clear in this definition. I hope that you might have understood it properly, you might have understood it completely rather, isn't it? Now what are the factors? I'll discuss ahead. Let me explain one more thing. Now this is, for example, this is I have explained this. Now the general formula, other formula, they are derived from this formula, the basic and prime formula for calculating price elasticity. Now the definition is price elasticity. What a price elasticity of demand? Price elasticity is nothing, when we generalize from this definition of Marshall, price elasticity isn't it, of demand is the degree or extent, isn't it, of quantity demanded to the change in price, isn't it, to the change in price. Degree of responsiveness, degree is the extent or is the degree or extent of quantity, degree or sorry, price elasticity of demand is the degree or extent of responsiveness, sorry, of responsiveness, isn't it, of quantity demanded, to the change in price. It's simple, the definition, it does, I don't need to mention definition like this. Degree of I write it again, degree of responsiveness, degree of responsiveness of quantity demanded, isn't it, quantity demanded to the changes in price alone, because here the variable is price. Now this is the definition of elasticity of demand, price elasticity of demand, degree of responsiveness quantity demand to the change in price. Now let me put forth few examples, then I'll also explain the extremities of the concept and what are the determinants, the most important thing that you need to understand for conceptualizing this concept, for understanding and comprehending this concept clearly, is to understand the determinants of elasticity. First of all, let me explain, I have explained till now, let me illustrate you the concept of elasticity with the help of few examples, and then I'll explain the determinants of elasticity accordingly. Now let us take for example, first example, that let us have good x, isn't it, good x, isn't it, let us have a good x, for example, it can be any normal good. Now its price is like this, and this is quantity demanded, this is, isn't it, this is price, this is 10 and this is 15, okay. and this is 100 units, and this is 20. Now you can see that price has increased from 10 to 15, so there is a 50% increase in price. 50% increase in price. So the let me explain first quantity. Now we have seen that formula, that is ED, that is elasticity of demand, price elasticity of demand, that is percentage, the formula, general formula, percentage changed by del in quantity demanded, isn't it? Quantity demanded divided by percentage change in price, isn't it? This is the formula, the general formula that is used for elasticity, calculating price elasticity of demand, that's PED, isn't it? PED. Now price has increased from 10 to 15, so there is 50% increase in price of a commodity. Now the quantity demanded has decreased by 80%. See, from 100 to 20, this is 80%. 80%, isn't it? Now just look at this example. Is the demand sensitive in this case or insensitive? See, law of demand establish an inverse relationship between quantity demand and price. So price has increased by 50%, by 50%, isn't it? 50%. Price has increased by 50%. Quantity demanded should fall as per law of demand. Quantity demanded should fall by more than 50. Try to understand this point. If there is inverse relationship between the two variables, quantity demand and price, as per law of demand, so let us employ that inverse relationship. Price has increased by 50%, so quantity demand has to fall by more than 50, isn't it? More than 50, that is 80. That is in this case 80 in this example, but should it might be 51%, the change in quantity demanded. It might be 52%, it might be 53%, but more than 50%. Try to understand this point. Now in this case it's 80%. It's 80%. Now we can say this is ED, percentage change in quantity demand, that's 80, and divided by percentage change in price, that is 50. So this is greater than 1. This is greater than 1. So in this case we say that demand is elastic. Demand is elastic. In this case we say demand is elastic. Similarly, another case, so increase in price. Now remind that example, for a given increase in price, here in this case we say it's relatively elastic. Now it has not fallen to zero, it's relatively elastic, or we can say highly elastic. Highly elastic, relatively. Whenever the increase in price, isn't it? Whenever the decrease in quantity demanded is more than the increase in price, isn't it? We say that the demand is relatively elastic. Relatively elastic. Now you saw the definition of when for a given rise in price. Rise in price is 50%. For a given quantity demanded falls much, isn't it? This is much, so it is what? It's elastic. The definition of, I'll show you. This is definition of Marshall. For a given rise in price, diminishes much. This is the point, diminishes much. So it diminishes in this example much by 80%. For a given rise in price, is 50%, and it diminishes much. So when it diminishes much, the elasticity is great. elastic is great, it means highly elastic. So this is quite evident now, quite evident what I am trying to make you understand. Now see another example. For example, let us have another example. This is evident. Another example is the this is price of x, this is quantity demanded of x, isn't it? Price is 10 and quantity demand is 4, and price is 10 and it has decreased to 4, and correspond to 10 hundreds of goods are demanded, and it is 150, it's 150. So 60% change price, isn't it? And 50% change in quantity demanded. Now see, price has decreased from 10 to 4, it has decreased by 60%. So when quantity demanded increases much for a given decrease in price, so decrease in price is 60. Keep in mind the definition of Alfred Marshall. So decrease in price is 60% and quantity demand has increased from 100 to 150. It means that it has increased little, not much. So when it increased little for a given rise in price, for a given fall in price, it increased little, it increased little. So in this case, when it's little, it means inelastic. Relatively inelastic, or simply we say inelastic. In this case, this is as per the formula, quantity demand, change in quantity demand divided by change in price, that is 60%. It's less than sorry, not equal to, it's less than 1. So when it's less than 1, it's, so if the increase in price is 60, decrease in price in 60%, the increase in quantity demanded should have been more than 60. Is try to understand this as per law of demand, isn't it? But it's only 50%. So that's why Marshall said that if for a given uh, rise in price, for a given rise in price, or for a given decrease in price, quantity demand increases or decreases much or little respectively. So in this case, for a given decrease in price, quantity demanded increases little, only by 50%. So in this case, it's insensitive, it does not respond to quantity demanded, isn't it? So in this case, the demand is relatively inelastic. Relatively inelastic because it does not respond at all. So this is quite simple to understand. Now see another example. This is price of x, this is quantity demanded of x, and this is 10 and this is 5, and this is 100 units and this is 150 units. So quantity demanded, change in quantity demanded here is, this is not mentioned in the definition of Alfred Marshall, this is percentage change in price, that is 50%, and percentage change in quantity demand is also 50%, isn't it? You can see that. So this cancels, this equals 1. So equal change, proportionate change in price brings about proportionate change in quantity demanded. In this case, we say that it's unit elastic. It is unit elastic. Unit elastic demand. This also has applications in economics. When this happens, we say this is unit elastic. So now let us move a bit ahead in explaining the reason that what are the different factors and what are different externalities, what are different extremities of price elasticity of demand. We just saw that elasticity of demand, for example, let us, it is greater than 1, isn't it? It is less than 1, and we also saw that ed is equal to 1, isn't it? So this greater or equal to 1 and less or equal to 1. So far as these three examples are concerned, we saw that the value of the coefficient of elasticity of demand is in these values, is either less or it's either greater than 1 or equal to 1, either less than 1 or equal to 1. Now the extremities of, there are two extremes, one is infinity and another is 0, ed, isn't it? Less or equal to infinity, greater or equal to 0, isn't it? These are the two extremities. This is one extremity, this is another extremity. How? For example, let us have a demand curve. In this case, let us have a demand curve. This is q of x, this is price of x, isn't it? Now this is, for example, q naught, and this is price, this is price. Now this is p1, this is p2, this is p3, and so on. Now corresponding to the given quantity, is it the change in price from p1 to p2, p3 and p4, pn, the quantity demanded remains same. So there is zero change, isn't it? There is zero change, zero change, 0% change in quantity demanded, because the quantity demand remains same. You are increasing price from p1 to p2 to p3, pn, but the quantity demand remains same. It does not fall at all. So in this case, the definition is, the formula, employing the formula, it is percentage change in quantity demand, that is 0, divided by anything, isn't it? That is 0. So in this case, we say it's perfectly inelastic, perfectly inelastic, isn't it? So here quantity demanded does not respond at all to the change in price. So quantity demand is completely insensitive, unresponsive and insensitive, completely insensitive, completely unresponsive to the change in prices. So this can be a case of necessities, isn't it? Necessities which don't have any substitute at all. It will be covered. Till now you have to understand what is the concept and what does it mean perfectly inelastic. We will come to this, that uh, what are the factors that determine price elasticity of demand in the upcoming in the upcoming lecture rather. This is the case of perfectly inelastic demand, when the quantity demanded does not respond to the change in price at all. Okay, now let us take another demand curve. This is the demand curve, isn't it? Now this is qx and this is px, price of x. Now this is p naught, isn't it? Quantity demanded here in this case, quantity demanded in this case, it can be q1, q2, q3, q4 and so on. So corresponding to a single price, isn't it, a fixed price, the quantity demanded of the commodity that increases. So employing the formula, we say ed is equal to, so change in quantity demand, that's positive because it's increasing, divided by change in price. Change in price is 0, so anything divided by 0, that's infinity, isn't it? Now in this case, what is happening? The definition is that in this case, if we increase price of this commodity, in this case, when this case, we say that the demand is perfectly elastic. It's perfectly elastic. It's perfectly elastic. So what does it mean that it's perfectly elastic? It means that if we increase price, by a small amount in this, the quantity demand will fall to zero. Why? What is the reason? The reason is it's the reremost case of perfect competition, where we have large numbers of sellers, you know, large numbers of large number of sellers in the market. So there are infinite substitutes of homogeneous commodity, infinite substitutes. This is the extreme case, one extreme case, that perfectly inelastic I discussed. Another case is perfectly elastic. So if I increase price by a small amount, quantity demand will fall to zero, because if the price of the commodity is 5 rupee or $5, I increase the price by $1, it will be $6. I will lose all the customers, and the quantity demand of the good will fall to zero, because the customers will switch to other sellers in the market, because there is availability of large number of sellers in the market, isn't it? In such case, it's extremely sensitive, it's perfectly sensitive demand. We can't touch the price, we can't play with the price of a commodity in this case, because it's perfectly sensitive, it's perfectly responsive. So this is the another extreme. So between these two extremes, we have that cases, that relatively elastic demand and relatively inelastic demand, and this is perfectly elastic demand and perfectly inelastic demand that I explained. So this is what comprised the session of this, of the theme of this lecture. I'll cover the determinants and how to deal with determinants, and with life examples from daily life, the products that we use, such examples that will make your concepts quite clear in the another lecture, that will be determinants of price elasticity, and how to understand the determinants. And I'll also cover few examples, most important examples in that lecture, so as to clear this theoretical part that I have discussed in this lecture. Hope that you might have understood the topic well, and let us meet in the another lecture. Thank you.